Liam, there are three reasons why I'm deeply humbled and overjoyed to connect with you today on Sunday Sips. The first of which, as CEO and CCO of Qaelon Medical, you and your global team are on a mission to transform a 100-year-old standard of care in air leak testing for colorectal surgery, a legacy technique that is analog and highly subjective. And when it fails, the outcomes for patients are severe, including sepsis, abscesses, organ failure, and death. Many patients who experience an undetected anastomotic leak will need revision surgeries, which can lead to a permanent stoma bag out of their abdomen, forever altering the way they'll use the restroom for the rest of their life. Fueled by your son's journey with Crohn's disease, where 70% of patients will likely need surgery, you're on a mission to develop the world's first real time digital intraoperative surgical leak detection and insufflation platform to protect your son from future complications. And this brings us to the second reason that I'm so humbled and overjoyed to curate this discussion. Liam, you are a fierce entrepreneur with an unparalleled depth of medtech experience that would humble most folks in our industry. And you're a veteran, having served as a naval officer with 300 lives in your hand every day. During our most recent chat, when I asked you about your transition from the military into medtech leadership, I found your answer peculiar. You told your recruiter that you were looking for an opportunity where you would feel just as proud as when you were wearing a Navy uniform. And you found that sense of pride carrying the bag as a sales rep at Ethicon Endosurgery, the same beautiful company that I served for a decade of my life as an engineer and global leader, progressing meaningful innovation that empowers clinicians to heal the patients they serve. A career in service to medtech is an honorable profession, and it suits you well. And that leads to the third and final reason that I'm so humbled and filled with joy. It's because I have no idea where this conversation will take us. I've, I've prepared plenty of questions that will dabble across your experiences in sales, business development, and executive leadership in both large medtech strategics as well as startups such as Qaelon. But I'm genuinely just intrigued and curious about where we go from here. Liam Burns, you have a remarkable big brain, so it is a privilege to officially welcome you to the Sunday Sips podcast, where I carefully curate the latest big brain insights worth sipping on. So that's all I got. Let's get to work. That's all I got, Liam.
Thanks, Joe.
Yeah.
I'm really excited to be here and share some of the experiences that I've had. Not just about Kalon. I think great leadership is made in your personal life and in your experiences along the way. And I like telling stories, so I'm happy to share what I can with you.
So, hey, it's the pretentious engineer from the future, and I am so excited to connect with you. I've reviewed this conversation with Liam countless times during the editing process, and you are in for a treat. Now, that said, I know you're likely incredibly busy, whether you're a medtech executive, an engineer, global strategic marketer, or someone else passionate about progressing global healing. So, I want to share three reasons why I think this conversation will be deeply valuable for you on your journey. The first of which, Liam is the CEO of Qaelon Medical, and him and his team are on a mission to disrupt a century-old standard of care in surgical leak detection through the air bubble test by taking this technology from analog to digital and hopefully building out a multi-billion-dollar market across both insufflation and leak detection in a digital means. Really cool stuff. You're going to love it. Number two, Liam has a remarkable journey as an innovator. He started as a Navy officer, and many aspects of that experience he still carries into the way he leads today. He transitioned from Navy into Ethicon sales, moved up into the sales organization, did multiple startups, has had multiple product launches, as well as exits under acquisitions. And then he's moved into being a medtech startup global executive at Qaelon, and he's been in that role for, I think, just over a year or so, which is fantastic. And then the third, and this is kind of my promise to all of you, by the end of this episode, you'll have a deeper understanding of what I call the innovation trifecta. There's three corners of it. The first of which is the clinical unmet needs faced by colorectal surgeons. And we go through the different risks present in colorectal surgery. If you're not familiar with that, I share some of my experiences experiencing that in Japan. Number two, we'll go through Qaelon's novel technology solution to meet those unmet needs, why it's so special, and really wicked smart, in my opinion, and then the third of which just shifts and trends in the colorectal market from a reimbursement perspective, as well as other pressures economically that are being put on hospitals, and why having better accuracy, a digital solution around leak detection could be so transformative from a commercial viability perspective, leading again Qaelon into a multi-billion-dollar market, which is epic. At the end of this discussion, I will summarize Liam's 5 big brain ideas that I've synthesized by reviewing this conversation multiple times so that you could take these 5 principles with you into your context. I'd encourage you to stay till the end. And before we jump back in, we have 2 words from our sponsors of the Sunday Sips podcast. So you can sip on that. So, first of all, this episode of Sunday Sips is caffeinated by me. Now, I am a full time entrepreneur. I have been building my business for almost 2 years, and I put around 100 hours total into each episode of Sunday Sips across connecting with the speaker, pre production planning, shooting the episode, all the edits, and post edit campaigning. And the reason I do this is because it's a beautiful opportunity for me to curate these dialogues in MedTech and highlight these wonderful innovators that are healing from the margins. And it also connects people with my business and services. So I've put 100 hours into this for you. If you have 15 minutes, this next step would be incredibly helpful for me because I receive a lot of DMs from different folks, and I just can't actually navigate all those discussions from people. So the best way that I can organize all this is I have a wait list. Let me find my magic button. There we go. So I have a big brain wait list. This has a 10-minute video that goes through a bit of my story, a bit of my capabilities. And even if you aren't necessarily a perfect fit for these capabilities, you knowing them is a huge help to me because I'm probably 1 or 2 degrees of separation away from a lead that's transformative for my business that I could provide massive value to. So if you could take the time to pause this, keep it open in a tab on your phone, and go to this waitlist and watch this video, that would be massive for me. And then next step is you can click on any of these big brain waitlist buttons and they will take you to a series of 6 questions that helps me understand you better. This will also kick off an email sequence where I'll bring you through the last year of my entrepreneurial journey with 10 posts that'll help you take greater risks in your own journey to build the life you desire, living where you want, loving what you do, and being paid well for it. So I'd love if you can navigate this waitlist. And the second thing, which is kind of pressing or new, is I have the opportunity to do a keynote in Basel, Switzerland in March. And if you'd like to connect in person, this is the best way to connect with me right now. There's going to be incredible conversations around health tech, which is a combination of both pharma and medtech innovation. I love surgical robotics. I love the ideas of positioning localized pharmaceuticals via robotics into different spaces. So there's going to be some fun dialogue here. And if you go down to the speakers, there's an astronaut, there's Fauci, and if you click across a couple more, here comes my happy face right there. So I'll be there. You can navigate this whole website just to learn more about the event and logistics if this is a good fit for you and members of your team. I do get affiliate commission if you decide to go, which is also helpful for my business. So please don't go to this ticket shop. There'll be a link in the bottom of this video. That's my affiliate link. It should say personal ticket shop from Joey Sasaki. And if you purchase your tickets there, I also get a commission, which is super cool. So anyway, that's all I have from me. And let's see what else we have from my main sponsors of today's episode. Hey, pretentious engineer here. I know you didn't ask, but this episode of Sunday Sips is caffeinated by Kinetic Vision. Throughout my decade-long career in surgical robotics, I've worked with many MedTech consultants, and without question, Kinetic Vision stands in a league of their own. They masterfully curate the art of science, accelerating innovation through advanced technology. Their capabilities, creativity, and candor have consistently made them my most trusted digital external innovation partner. We've collaborated across continents and time zones, tackling challenges and unconventional ideas and taking them from white paper to fully functional MVPs. Their contributions, from early concept generation to usability studies, test automations, digital twin creation, VR simulations, and beyond, have been pivotal in moving breakthrough ideas towards real-world clinical use. My partnership with Kinetic Vision has been a decade in the making, and it's an honor to introduce you to their world-class capabilities. If you're facing technical challenges beyond what you can do in-house, I trust Kinetic Vision to help you find the path forward and empower you to innovate on behalf of global patients and the clinicians you serve. Finding the right partner to drive digital transformation within your organization and product pipeline is critical to the long term success of a MedTech business. So, check out the link in the description below to take the Digital External Innovation Readiness Assessment, which includes a waitlist for experiencing a discovery session with Kinetic Vision. It'll take you less time than it takes to finish your coffee or tea, and it'll provide you with greater clarity on if Kinetic Vision is right for you. Anyways, you could sip on that, and let's get back to Sunday sips. Oh my gosh, it's amazing. And Liam, I meant every word. Like, it's been so amazing crossing paths with you over the last couple months since connecting through Steve Bell. And I'm just so excited to see how all of this unfolds. You have such deep wealth of insights across this industry that I care so deeply about. And I'm also hanging out with the baby, so I'm going to give him a drink while we chat. One other quick note before we jump in. Oh, he's got an orange nose, distracted. One other quick note I have is for our viewers, I will try to make the language of our discussion as accessible and inclusive as possible. So after this dialogue, I'll record a second SIPS episode where I'll break things down and sketch things on a tablet, pull up images or videos just to help folks. But I want you to speak at your level with your authority in these spaces. So I don't want that to slow you down in any way. But yeah, I guess the first place that I like to start with these dialogues is for you to share a bit about the essence who you are. It could start with your origin state, wherever you began, but how would you describe yourself to somebody who's never been in proximity with you?
Yeah, so I think the first thing I'd say, Joe, is that I'm one of 8 children. And so when you're one of 8, unless you're bleeding or dying, you don't always get your parents' attention.
Yeah.
And so we learned at a very young age that we had to distinguish ourselves individually. We are 8 very different human beings with different skill sets and different minds. And so that achievement drive was instilled very early on. I also think the formative part of my life was growing up as one of 8 children. And my dad worked for the government, so economics didn't always work with that. And so I think the second part of the achievement, the drive to contribute and impact, started with that as well. And so I think those two things really created a hunger for doing great things, for being impactful to the world. My father worked for 40 years for the Central Intelligence Agency. And as you can imagine, we knew very little about what he did. Um, but we also were honored to watch his career and some of the things that he did, and those are part of history. And so I think we watched that impact, and all of us wanted to have that similar impact. I was drawn to healthcare. As you shared, I was a naval officer. Was very proud of serving the country and wearing the uniform. It was probably the most formative leadership experience of my life. And so when I got out of the military, I really wanted to find something just as impactful. And Cameron Brooks, the junior military officer recruiting program, Roger Cameron recruited me and placed me with Ethicon. Um, and so I felt like, okay, wow, I'm in an organization that I can be really proud of. And then the development started from there. And so I think those were some of the key things that got me started. And then the journey I'm very proud of the growth I've had, the failures, the successes, the adversity, all of those things I think have made me a better leader, a more empathetic leader. If everything goes right every time, you'll never have empathy for the people that struggle. And I've certainly learned that throughout my life, and that's woven into the way I think about leadership today.
No, that's beautiful. I was going to write this down. So you said when everything doesn't go right, you have empathy for. Can you repeat that? That was so good.
Yeah, so I mean, we've all had failures, and I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
about a time early in my career. I was at Johnson and Johnson, and I was struggling as I transitioned into leadership. And someone mentored me, um, a very influential leader, higher in the organization, saw the potential in me, saw I was struggling, and without anything to benefit for himself, he kind of took me under his wing and coached me. And so it's things like that where you struggle. Leadership has to have empathy, um, and I've learned that from my own failures, my own adversity, both in my personal life as well as in the challenges of working in startups. And so I think empathy is a key trait that makes leaders better. It is also part of the culture that you create is based on the empathy you have. And so, we've certainly had a wide variety of people work for us in our careers. And there are ones that are struggled, that are working very hard. Maybe they don't have the skill set or the experience, or there's something that's kind of derailing their performance. um, the empathy that I've gained in my life, I've brought to those situations. Some of those people have overcome them, and I've been proud to coach and mentor them through that. Some others have self-selected and say, okay, this is not my path. But you can do that with heart and with caring, even in the world of high performance expectations that MedTech has.
It's so beautiful. So where have you, because when I think about the military, the first word I don't think about is empathy. So from a Navy perspective, and that's probably, a bias I have that's not correct, but where did you employ that when you were leading? You said 300 people. Like bring us into some of those
Yeah,
experiences.
so
'Cause I've never been on
so
a boat
everyone
that big.
thinks that military leadership is autocratic and yes,
Mhm.
sir, Lieutenant Burns, and everything that goes with that. And the truth is, especially in the junior level, it couldn't be farther away. And so when you lead as a naval officer, you don't have a way to give bonuses to your people. uh, the things that you can give them are not compensation related. So, first and foremost, the way you treat them. And I stepped on a ship at 23 years old, got my watch officer qualification fairly quickly. And when you're the officer of the deck, you have responsibility for everyone on the ship, which for my ship was around 300 sailors. But you can't drive them and, as people say, you can't whip the horse harder to get it to run faster.
Mhm.
What you have in the military, especially in the junior officer ranks, is first and foremost showing these sailors respect. The enlisted men and women in the military do not get paid very well. They live under very difficult conditions. They're young, they're growing, they're maturing. And so the first thing they need is dignity and respect. And so when you treat them that way, and you treat them humbly, I walked on the ship and there was a kind of a smart ass sailor who said to me, "Hey, what are we supposed to do today, sir?" And I thought for a second. First of all, I had no idea. And secondly, I admitted I had no idea. I said, I have no idea. Here's what I would like. I'd like you to do what you did yesterday and try to do it a little better. And that was my guidance. And so when you work with the senior enlisted, the chief petty officers in the Navy, they are the backbone of the Navy. The senior enlisted are the backbone of the military. And so I collaborated very closely with them, first to create a culture of dignity and respect. Secondly, to give them the things that could advance them. And that was training and development and the time that they could study to get promoted. Those promotions were out of my hands. The only thing I could do was support them with training. And the last thing that you can give them is time off. When you're deployed at sea, the the working hours are 18 hours a day at least, maybe 20 between your watches and the work that you have to do on a ship when you're underway. But when you're in port, you can do your maintenance activities, you can do your training activities. And when my people were done, I sent them home.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we collaborated on was because there's always a duty section that stays on the ship, a small reserve that can get the ship ready to get underway if there's an emergency. And so, out of the 50 men that were in my department, we had a watch section of about three or four, maybe five. And so what we did is we divided the work up so that the duty section took over at 1 o'clock. and they worked as long as they had to do to make sure everyone's work was done. Everyone else got to go home to their families. And so those are the kind of the things that I did to give them the respect, the dignity, and they didn't always like the decisions. I pushed them hard. We were under incredible stress when you're operating at sea. And I wasn't in a war zone, so I wasn't in the Gulf. I wasn't in combat. We did drug operations down the Caribbean, which got a little crazy at times, but we weren't in that type of combat. But when you're operating a ship at sea, it's dangerous, and so those are the things that I did to try to give them what they need to encourage them, and was super proud of my record of the people in my divisions and departments that were promoted. The percentage of those that were promoted on time was something I was very, very proud of.
Oh my gosh, that's so amazing. So when when excuse me, so when you moved from military into sales, like sometimes people perceive that sales is a little bit of an individualistic sport, right? It's all about you competing to hit the right metrics, your right targets, you're going out, you're interacting, and it's based on the volumes and how competent you are in many ways. So, how did you bring aspects of your team building and leadership development into a role where you were an individual contributor? Because that must have been a bit of a flip as well for you.
Yeah, I mean the first 6 months of my time in sales were ugly. Um, and a shout out to Steve Roper, my first manager, and Dave Harris, my trainer, who was also a former military officer. Um, I went from being a naval officer where everyone listened to what I said
Mhm.
to being a sales rep, even with Ethicon, a very reputable company, where no one listened to what I said.
Yeah.
And so I had to switch gears very, very quickly. And I'll tell you, I didn't. I struggled. The first 6 months, I was regurgitating product information like an encyclopedia. I could still tell you the chemical formulation of Vicryl suture, one of the sutures that I sold with Ethicon, and that is not how you sell. And so I remember Steve coming to me and saying, "Okay, Liam, what product are you really excited about that you, in your mind, it's ridiculous that not every surgeon uses it?" So at that time, they were doing cataract surgery. They would close the cornea with a very small suture,
Mm.
and we had the best needle in the world. The cornea is one of the toughest tissues. And I could still describe the needle to you, but I think I'll put you to sleep.
No, it's awesome.
Um,
I
and I
love this stuff.
and I went and focused on that. I was having better conversations because I wasn't about product focus. I was with the surgeons. One of the great things about eye surgery is that there's a training scope. So I was at the scope seeing exactly what the surgeon said, which by itself was a vote of confidence and trust that they brought me that close to the patient and to the procedure. That also allowed me to guide the way, the angle of needle entry in the cornea. So I did things like that. And so it kind of made me a geek very, very, very fast. And so, sales is an individual sport. And when people ask me about that, here's what I say. I was a naval officer. So if you ask me what I was like as a sales rep, I took the best parts of everyone in my sales division. This was one of the things that Dave and Steve did. I took the expert parts of Marcus, who was so good with the people, and Aileen, who could talk at a peer level with the clinicians, and Dave, who was the analytics guru who knew a 1 degree temperature change in his customer's life. And so I put all those things together. So there is no Liam style of selling. It was, kind of this quilt of expertise from other people that had been doing it longer than me, and the humility to accept that and shamelessly copy what works. And apparently it did work. My second year, I was lucky enough to win Sales Rep of the Year, which is still one of my proudest moments. Ethicon at that time was, I think, the intuitive of today in terms of the caliber of people and the procedural participation with the surgeon. So that's still one of my proud moments, even though it's long ago. But I will tell you, as a CEO, you can't forget about carrying the bag. And in
Mhm.
every startup that I've been in, the funnest part is being in the operating room with world leading surgeons and changing the way they do surgery. So that to me is kind of the exciting part of the job. And I think everyone in a company, whether you're the CEO, head of R&D, head of marketing, head of regulatory, everyone is in sales in some way, whether you're articulating the story, whether you're out there with customers. And to me, that's the fun part. I'd rather be in the operating room than anywhere else in the world.
Yeah, that was probably one of the most amazing experiences for me in Japan. Was I had worked as an engineer at J&J for about 8 years before moving out and directing innovation. And I had the opportunity to start doing clinical immersions and traveling with our sales team and just understanding the service involved with sales and just the amount of care they give to these clinicians and how their entire personal life wraps around the needs of the clinicians, these top KOLs. They travel with them, they cater to them in any way that they possibly can. And they do have these hard metrics they're trying to hit. Like we put a lot of challenges on our commercial organizations, at least at Ethicon, but there's kind of a beauty in the craft and the discipline of that I had so much respect for because I had worked in surgical robotics for almost a decade and I'd seen one procedure during that time. I'd innovated on multiple instruments, multiple robotics platforms, tons of requirement cascades. And yet I was so siloed from the needs of the clinicians that are so critical to developing transformative technologies. So that experience forever changed my life just to be proximal and to kind of not, I've never carried the bag, but I was really close to people that would bring the bag to the table as I then facilitated dialogues. And it's a beautiful craft. So I'm glad you have that experience. And so you started in sales and then you got top rep after 2 years, and then where did you go from there within Ethicon
So
land?
then the management career started. So I went in, I ran sales training, and then became a sales manager of a regional team of about 10 people. Again, a totally new job. And this is where really I could tap back into the leadership experience I had. I wanted to create something in the culture that motivated people, but also they had a responsibility to the other people in the team. We certainly were shooting for number one, just like as an individual. And I had people in my team that were pursuing the number one sales rep job. And so I try to create an energy where they realize that they were carrying the ball not just for themselves and their families, but also for the division and the pride of what we were doing. So in the second year push, this is right about the time the Cleveland Browns came back into football, and I am a Browns fan, so I'm always looking for the long shot and hoping for a better year, and this year is no different.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I did, I created a playbook, which was basically a spiral bound notebook. I had written some categories into the notebook of, what are you doing that makes sales go faster? What are the obstacles you're overcoming? How are you doing that? And then I created 3 or 4 pages for each member of the team, and I encouraged people to write in there what they were proud of their teammates, what their teammates did that they learned from, what they were good. And I sent it with a Cleveland Browns football. And each week in the last quarter of the year, that football got passed, handed off to a new member of the team, and no one could see it except when it was in your possession. And the expectation was two things: one, you contribute to the dialogue that's in that notebook, and two, the football, you're carrying the football every single day in work. And so I know sports analogies get overused and at times they're too much, and there's some people that don't identify with them. I had a massive Cleveland Browns and some Pittsburgh Steeler fans in my team. And so
Yeah.
this was an analogy that everyone felt comfortable with. And it was amazing how when people read what other people in the team wrote about them, it was just it was an emotional experience for them. They felt seen, they felt heard, they felt appreciated. Of course, I added stuff in there too, but to see all the colors of ink and the different handwriting and then the different notes, when I got it back, I was so excited to see how that little just energy and culture that we tried to create really carried us forward. We were lucky again to be the number one division driving growth for Ethicon Biosurgery. So that was very exciting. And I still have that notebook in football.
I was going to ask.
So it's still a cherished possession, if you will. But when I go back to the notebook, it kind of reminds me like, okay, am I creating that kind of culture and teamwork today? Startup teams are very different. We're now fragmented with different scenarios of where we're working and remote working and things like that. You still have to create that culture. It's 100 times harder on the screen,
Yeah.
but it still matters. And so those touch points, those little nudges along the way, whether that's a text, an email, a picture, a laugh, or whatever, that's embedded in kind of the culture that I want to create.
It's so beautiful. I've never heard of anything like that ever for a team. Because you're passing on so much knowledge from person to person, but it's weaving their stories together, which is really compelling. Because everyone, when you're building a company, you have to create a really strong mission and vision while you're operating within a larger strategic at that point. Like that was probably 90s, I'm assuming, if it was early at Ethicon time that you were doing that.
Yeah, it was late 90s
Yeah,
going into 2000.
yeah, because I heard so many stories of like folks that were at the very start of Ethicon. I always try to connect with the sages when I first joined, and just people that had all the legacy of working, trying to beat COVIDian, and like just the start of that journey. And I wish they had written it down because I have so much in my head from conversations, but the way that they passed it as a manuscript was really neat, and that you still carry it today, a couple
Well,
decades
I will
later.
tell you when you look at the executive leadership across the top med tech companies today, there are still leaders there that started at US Surgical, and the training that was involved in that, the level of expectation of procedural knowledge was so high because you were teaching a surgeon how to do the most vital part of that procedure, and you're the rep, you're the industry. And so, Leon Hirsch, arguably one of the visionaries in medtech, knew that his team had to have the same level of expertise as a surgeon. And that really influenced the way I think about it. And so here's the way I think about clinical dialogue and procedural knowledge and medical knowledge. Now, disclaimer, I got a D in organic chemistry. So that was the end of me ever being a doctor, much less a surgeon. But when I think about the bar that was set by Leon Hirsch, um, here's my goal when I have a conversation with a clinician. Imagine there's an industry person and there's a surgeon sitting in the doctor's lounge somewhere. We're both in scrubs and we're sitting there talking before the case. My expectation is that if somebody were listening to the conversation, if they could tell who the industry person was and who the surgeon was, I will tell you, I will feel like I failed.
Mhm.
I have to have the peer level conversations with the surgeon, not about the buttons on my technology, not about trying to sell, but it starts with a peer level dialogue of, okay, what are you worried about in this case? What are you doing in this procedure that's going to be very risky? What are the things that you're doing to overcome those risks? And when you start with that, rather than, hey, let me show you my stapler, my glue, my leak detection, or whatever,
Mhm.
you've lost them. They look at you as an industry person instead of a peer, and I think that's where you see just incredible people. And so, that started with watching Leon Hirsch and watching, what Ethicon Endosurgery did to elevate the knowledge of their salespeople. And it went further. I was at ConMed for a year and a half. I launched the AirSeal robotic solution. Was very lucky to work with Gary Teagan. He was the head of clinical, and um, we lost Gary very tragically last year. But he said, I thought I was doing well on the peer level dialogue.
Mhm.
And then I had time with Gary. And I will tell you, there's no one I've ever seen in industry who has that level or had that level of clinical expertise. He would dive into every single clinical. And it was at that moment where I realized, I read a lot of clinical papers when there's a topic we're digging into. Gary read every one of them. He read the ones about AirSeal. He read the ones about all the competitors to AirSeal, and he could quote the outcomes oftentimes better than the surgeons he was talking with. And so when you have that level of procedural knowledge, which is, I think, what Leon Hirsch taught the world, and the level of clinical knowledge to where you have the data, not just around your technology, but around the entire procedure, like Gary did, those are two very high standards to live up to, and they still drive me today.
I'm thinking there's so many directions we can move in from that. One memory I have of time in Japan was attending a colorectal procedure in Osaka, and I'll de-identify everything else. But I was attending a colorectal procedure. It was with a top tier clinician, robotic surgery, and there's just a very meticulous approach to how they work through like lymph node dissections. They typically take more lymph nodes than in a US context. And there's so much care put into preparing for this anastomosis. So for folks who don't understand colorectal surgery, like you're trying to connect tubes and you're removing a section of the tube. And there's circular stapler that has an anvil with a line of staples, and then you will punch a hole through these two tubes you bring together and form two lines of staples. And that's supposed to create a leakless tube so that you don't have any issues with sepsis and other things. And I just remember this clinician spending between 20 to 40 minutes just precisely suturing and adjusting the tissue around that anvil because there was so much concern. Like there's great energy in the room leading up to it. Everyone was chatting. And then they bring the part of the colon out of the abdominal cavity, which I'd never seen before. This is my first colorectal procedure. And they're working on this, and you just felt like the focus of the surgeon zeroing in. It was silent. And I actually asked him about it in a post-operative interview, and he was like, I'd never realized that that's the shift that occurs in the OR during that point. Like he thought this was just surgery, but everyone recognizes how critical that point is because you want to do everything you can to make sure these tubes are coming together as flush as possible. So you give yourself the best shot, not having an adverse event. Unfortunately, this procedure did have an adverse event. They had prepared the anastomosis. They went and did lymph node dissection for another 2 hours. And then when they're preparing to put it together, there's a lack of perfusion from an ICG. So they noticed lack of blood flow going to that region. And he brings in another surgeon, another hour, keeping the patient under anesthesia, just figuring out what they do. They ended up rerouting out a stoma bag, which is going to forever alter the way this individual is navigating the restroom for the rest of their life. And it ended up being an 11-hour procedure. And I just remember like the shame and pain on this clinician's face at that outcome. We were supposed to do like a photo op, like it was supposed to be great for J&J and them and the sales rep. And it was a completely different heavy tone at the end of that day, just pure exhaustion. So I guess the way I want to frame that for you and for Qaelon is this clinician did everything they possibly could with all the tools available to serve their patient and still had an outcome that was suboptimal. And a lot of folks think that different technologies are kind of saturated. There's not more we need to do. Standard of care is the best it can be. But the reality is there's things we can do to actually improve outcomes and provide better analytics to these clinicians, better decision-making, so that we don't have that pain both to the patient, the clinician, after 11 hours. So I'd just love to give you a little bit of space to kind of speak around that, and just what happens in colorectal procedures. You know numbers that I don't know in these spaces with Qaelon. But it was a very kind of sacred moment I got to share with that clinical team to stay in the room and see what was going on and to experience the weight of an outcome nobody wants after, you have decades of experience in that room and the best technology and the best robot, and it still doesn't work out for the patient. So I'll kind of let that hang and give you space to navigate it as you feel led.
Yeah. Well, first, I think you hit something that is very important to remember. Surgeons are doing everything they can with the tools that they have today, and our tools are getting better. Tools are getting better every single year, and I think what's changing now is that with data, we can support the surgeon with real-time information that they can use to adjust their procedure, the way they do things, and of course that drives outcomes. But I think we need to start with acknowledging that surgeons are under tremendous pressure, and they are trying to do the best they can. And so I think it starts with that. Now, the question is, how do we empower them to get better outcomes? And I think, you know, I think we lasted at least 12 minutes without saying the AI word, but
Yeah.
AI, data, whatever you want to call it, because the people use the buzzwords in a lot of different ways. Here's what it means. When we can give surgeons real time clinical decision making information, they can make better decisions. But we have to start that with relying on their expertise and their experience. I think the two things that are the major tools of a surgeon are their hands and are their brain. And so anything we can do for both of those, that's when you can impact change. And so, Qaelon, we're focused on leak detection. Everyone knows that. And leak detection, the standard of care today is the air leak test, just like a bicycle tire, where you inflate the bowel after you've delicately, as you described, created that anastomosis, and then you fill the pelvis with saline, you dunk it down underwater, you pressurize room air into the rectum, and you look for bubbles. That test was first reported in the medical literature in 1910. So I don't know of anything in medicine, much less surgery, that is the same as what we did in 1910. In fact, I don't know of anything we're doing the same that was probably to the year 2000. And so, the world is ripe for the digitization of leak detection. Think about it: thermometers, blood pressure, like every measurable thing that we do in surgery today is digital. And it's digital because then that data can be integrated into varying systems. It can be used to paint an entire picture of what's going on in the patient. Leak detection, is no different. It is going to be digitized. That's inevitable. Those are the words that I hear from surgeons all the time. Liam, it's inevitable that we're going to go to digital leak detection. And Qaelon has that technology, and we're excited about that. But it goes beyond that. We want to give the surgeons information during the surgery so that they can make better decisions. That is an empowerment. It's an enabler of their better decisions. It's not making decisions for them. I still defer to what I call the rock stars, the key opinion leaders, that have trained the world, that have found these little microscopic technique changes and procedure changes that are incredible. And I'll cite intuitive surgery as an example. One of the things that they started doing, and this is now old news, but they looked at the efficiency of movement of surgeons. And so they traced the distal end of the instrument, and they basically found that the less movement you have, the more efficient you are as a surgeon, but that efficiency translates into better outcomes. Because if you move the instrument less, incidental tissue damage is less, off camera injuries are less, and things like that. And so that's a little metric that we never would have thought of measuring in laparoscopic surgery, but in digital surgery and robotic surgery, we can measure that. And so, I always give a shout out to Bruce Ramshaw, a surgeon, and arguably, and he'll describe himself this way, as a data geek. And he says it all the time: anything you can measure in surgery, we can improve. And he has a track record that goes with that. That's measuring for better outcomes. That measuring has created data that companies have used to expand their regulatory claims and gotten additional approvals with FDA. But if you can measure it, you can improve the outcomes. And so that data part is core of our strategy. It drives product development. It drives the regulatory pathway. It drives the clinical data that we want. Because of course, what we're really focusing on, and when you talk to the leadership of Qaelon, Ron Shlomovitz, our founder, Lee Swanstrom, our president, two of the most prolific, innovative surgeons of this generation. We're first trying to have impact, and so I think that's the first thing that we are focused on. We believe data is what is going to create impact and eventually drive the standard of care. Our big goal is to change the standard of care in leak detection. It is essentially the air leak test and FlexSig test. That's what's used today. Our goal is to get the data as quickly as possible and present that in peer review journals so that the societies can look at that and go, you know what? This is a better standard, and we should change our standard of care. And I don't mean 5 years from now.
Mhm.
We're having discussions with the leaders that influence the clinical practice guidelines now. We've recruited them onto our scientific board so that it's embedded in our thinking. Not, hey, how do I prove my product works? That's not enough anymore. We want to have the data very quickly after launch where we can go to the surgical community and say, here's the data. This brings credibility. The test is accurate. It impacts leak rates. And most importantly, that data now can be used across the whole spectrum of surgery, whether that's GI or in the lung or in urology as well, where we have proof of concept there as well. We can impact that standard of care. That's when we know that we've done something great. And if we do that, certainly we're going to touch the lives of patients, and the investors that trusted us will see a very fair and hopefully above average return.
No, it's amazing. And for folks who have kind of seen some of my content before, I typically speak about something called the innovation trifecta, which I think this is where a lot of startups go to die, is they miss an aspect of this trifecta. But you have a clinical unmet need, which we've talked a lot around, of the challenges these patients are navigating. You want an orange? Okay. No, you want a drink? He's popping in and out from the show. But you have clinical unmet need. And then in the bottom corner, you have technical feasibility. So the ability to actually meet that need with some kind of novel innovation. And also, I would add IP around that and the ability to protect that innovation as you commercialize it. And then the third piece is commercial viability. I've seen many $100 million projects that Johnson & Johnson has progressed, get to market, and then die on landing after they hadn't considered challenges with commercialization strategy and incentivizing the sales force or other cross opco drama that I can't share on this podcast, where we tend to kind of shoot ourselves in the foot at times. So there's this high risk that if you end up in one corner, a clinician who thinks they have a really great idea, but they have no business around it, an engineer who thinks they have a really great way to make what they have incrementally better, but doesn't see how to commercialize it, or it doesn't solve a real problem that's clinically relevant, or you just have folks that are trying to do a money grab, but they have no solid technology. That's where startups die. Hey, pretentious engineer here. I know you didn't ask, but this week's episode of Sunday Sips is caffeinated by How to Start Up in MedTech, which is curated by the remarkable Steve Bell. Steve Bell has had his hands over tons of MedTech innovation over the last 30 plus years, including being the chief commercial officer of CMR Surgical, which is Europe's largest surgical robotics unicorn. If you're not aware of this company, they have progressed an incredible robotic surgical system called Versius. I had the opportunity to drive this system just a couple days ago in Chicago at the ACS Surgical Congress. And it is a remarkable, beautiful piece of technology to improve patient outcome. It has an incredibly low OR footprint, and you could just see the touches of his craftsmanship on this platform over the years. So really excited to bring you into proximity with Steve. He's a returning guest on the podcast. So here's an episode I did with him as well. But what I want to share with you is he has a course called How to Start Up in MedTech. And I took the course, it's 100 modules, and I actually recorded a video testimonial if you want to check out how it's changed my life. I recorded this in my Honda Odyssey, where I consumed most of this course. But if we just pop in for a minute, I'll show you one module and I'll share a special deal that Steve's extended to members of my community. So first of all, if we hop right in, how to build and run a startup in MedTech is what the course is called. And he's broken it down into multiple phases. If I scroll down a little bit, you have the early stages, Series A, Series B, Series C, and then all of these contain both video modules, but also like templates you can leverage, like PDF documents. So one that I really enjoyed was called Greed and Fear, which we'll watch. But before we jump into this, I just want to let you know that there is a promo code. So if you decide to purchase this course and check it out and really immerse under his teaching and insight, if you use the promo code BIGBRAIN30, all capital letters, BIGBRAIN 30, all one word, you'll get 30% off of this course, which is an incredible deal. It's incredibly generous from Steve to both curate this for us, but also for you to be able to get it at that price. So I'd highly recommend it. I'll show you the first minute of this module that I love about what motivates large strategics to actually look at a potential acquisition, and then we'll hop right back into the Sunday Sips episode. So here you go. Enjoy.
I'm coming towards the end of what I wanted to give you information on for the Series C round. And maybe it's now a good time for the next two videos to talk a little bit about potential exit. It's never too early to think about an exit, but it's very rare that you'll get an exit in the Series C. But it can happen, but it's since 2008, that's become very, very rare. But what I want to talk about as we think towards strategics who may well be interested in you as a company is what are their motivators for why would they be interested in you? I mean, they've already got multi-billion-dollar businesses. Why do they care about you? My experience over the years, having been inside the big companies, having worked with the big companies and done exits, is companies tend to work from two emotions. There is fear and there is greed.
So I think we've touched on the clinical space. I'd love to hear a bit more. If you could kind of geek out with us around how does Qaelon actually detect leaks in real time? What's the novel approach you've developed in those spaces from a technology perspective, and why is it so critical today?
So the idea that Aran Shlomovitz formed the company around, and let's go back just 1 minute.
Yeah, of course.
The company was formed because Aran and Lee were doing a endoscopic procedure. They had done it completely endoscopically. It was lower bowel. They were working on a repair. They had to do a full thickness closure after the repair. And when they got done, they said, well, how do I test the intestine for integrity? Because if this leaks, we all know the outcome of early surgical leaks. If you have an early leak in colorectal surgery, 18% of those patients die. Those are the leaks that happen in the first 7 days of surgery. 81% of them have a second operation. The cancer rates are twice as high. They're staying in the hospital. In the US, the data shows an extra 9 days. In Europe, it's an extra 14 days. So all these things are there, and that's going through their head. Like, we have to make sure that what we did, has integrity. And unfortunately, we're operating endoscopically, and we can't do the air bubble test, which is what's out there. And so they actually took the patient to the OR and did a laparoscopic procedure to conduct the air leak test. They confirmed that there was no leak, and the patient recovered beautifully. Now, Aran said, wait a second, we can't do this. We can't do an OR procedure after a GI suite procedure. This is crazy. There's got to be a better way. And so that was the genesis of the company. And what Aran envisioned was precisely monitoring gas concentrations in the operative cavity. And that's how you can very quickly determine whether or not there's a leak. So when you do laparoscopic surgery, the abdominal cavity, if you're doing GI work, is filled with CO2. That cavity should be 100% CO2. When you run the air bubble test, you inflate the rectum with air. And that air, if there is a leak, will escape into the abdomen. And Qaelon is precisely monitoring oxygen and CO2 levels on an ongoing basis. Once we detect the presence of oxygen, we know that the test organ, in this case the rectum, does not have integrity. And now it's a matter of trying to find out, where that is. And so, the work that we've done so far, over 1,200 preclinical tests, we have 100% accuracy in those tests, detecting holes that are 1 millimeter in size. And a lot of 1 millimeter holes you can't see with the naked eye. That's the size of one staple in your anastomosis. And so it's that small. And in fact, we were doing a demonstration with the chief medical officer of one of the major companies last year. And we had a 5 millimeter hole that we had created. So an obvious hole that is there to the naked eye. Every surgeon can see that. And so what he did, he actually did the saline drip test, which is another variation of the air bubble test, where you drip saline on your staple line or on the defect that you're concerned about. And if there's air escaping, bubbles should be very, very obvious. We're dripping on that 5 millimeter hole, that massive hole. There is absolutely not one bubble showing. And yet our oxygen levels are going up on our screen. And it was just an exciting moment to have simultaneously looking at the air bubble test, saline drip test, whatever you want to call it, and Qaelon side by side. That's the precision of the sensors that we have in our system. And the system itself, the leak detection part, is built on a constant flow insufflator. And so the underlying technology is used in every one of 37 million or more minimally invasive procedures today. And so we have dual functionality of a constant flow insufflator, which has been proven to reduce postoperative pain, accelerate discharge, and things like that. More importantly, it is the best way to create a stable operating platform, which is really important in the robot. The robotic arms are fixed in space once the robot is docked. And so if you have fluctuations in the abdominal wall based on your insufflation, you have the risk of undocking or doing tissue damage. There's additional torquing on your trocar ports and things like that. And so constant flow insufflation has been proven to be an enabler of robotic surgery. I saw that at ConMed with AirSeal, and definitely have taken those learnings into what I'm doing here with Qaelon.
So, first of all, it's awesome. Help me understand, how do you have 100% accuracy? Like, for anything I've ever tested, engineering, especially
I mean,
anything with tissue, there's always variability and challenges. So it's just really compelling because you said, I think, 1,200 tests or procedures. You could rerun that for me, but
yeah,
it's just a remarkable claim in innovation.
yeah. So first off, when I saw that number when I joined the company about a year and a half ago, I was a little skeptical. I'll be honest. 1,200 tests, varying tests, in vivo, in vitro, different situations. We're simulating all the different environments. We're testing throughout the length of the bowel from the esophagus all the way down to the rectum.
Oh, wow.
And certainly this isn't a pig model, so we're simulating other human situations. But when I went back through the spreadsheets and looked at the data, I was like, okay, I need to see this in action. I've seen it personally, every single test that we've done. And I think back on another demonstration we did, and this was at SRS last year, that was in Strasbourg, our home city, where again, another chief medical officer looked at our technology. And what he did was we created a hole, we did the leak test, it showed it worked. So then, without telling us, he grasped the hole with a grasper. And so now the leak is closed. And you saw the oxygen levels go down and the CO2 levels go up. So you're like, okay, certainly closed. And without telling us, we're watching it. It started to go down. And we're like, what's going on here? And we look over and he's kind of got a grin on his face because he had opened up the ratchet on the instrument and just a little bit of a leak could be detected. And you saw a very slight decrease in CO2 and rise in O2. Then he let it fall off and it literally spiked up. And it just firsthand, these are things that surgeons are doing in our tests that really bring great confidence. And it got to the point now where when we do demonstrations, whether that's for investors or the strategics that are following our technology, we actually do not train them on the device anymore. There's a button on our screen that says leak detection, start leak detection. And we tell them that's the button to push. And they're doing the procedure. They created the hole or the defect, or one time we did a transection. We thought the staple line had integrity. It was a negative test. And we're like, nope, somewhere on that staple line, there's a problem. And we saw it right away. But this surgeon, like literally by controlling the grasper, we rode the sine wave of like, no leak, leak, no leak, leak. And it was really, fascinating to see that without training. So now we don't train surgeons when we're demonstrating it because we want to show how easy it's an automated test sequence. It doesn't take training. When you show surgeons a graph of CO2 and O2, they know exactly what that means. And that's the best part of what we do. The workflow that we're using with our technology is exactly the same workflow that they're using today. It's faster. It creates data. We believe it's going to be more accurate. But it's something that's kind of intuitive to the way they look at the procedure.
One of the challenges that clinicians and healthcare providers are also navigating is just a lack of continuity of data from preoperative planning, intraoperative decision making, postoperative outcomes, and when you could actually see definitively whether there was a leak detected or not during the case, and when follow that outcome, that's also very empowering to clinicians to just know that, right?
Yeah, I mean, keep in mind that leaks are a multifactorial problem.
Mhm.
There are so many contributing factors in the pre-op space. So many patients today get irradiated or have some type of chemotherapy before they come to the OR. That changes the tissue. The devices that are used during the surgery, whether that's the stapler, the energy device, the perfusion device, all of these instrumentation have data. And then you get into the postoperative period and you have two companies that are pioneering smart drains. And so our belief around data is that we have a quantifiable, measurable data factor that can actually help bring transparency to leak detection or to leaks in general. And so our thought on the way we look at the data and what I'm building is an ecosystem. Let's talk about the GI tract, a GI tract ecosystem. So we are partnering with companies and startup companies or major strategics to where we can integrate all of this data together. For example, when I was at JP Morgan last week, met with a French company that is pioneering some blood analysis, which can quantify and predict the risk of SSI. SSI is certainly woven into the concerns around surgical leaks. That's a
SSI being
pre-op
surgical site infections, right?
surgical site
Yeah,
infection. Yeah.
just for
So
other viewers.
so by looking at the blood, they can predict different risk factors for surgical site infection. Certainly, we're in the operating room when you can add perfusion data. So perfusion is a driver of leaks that happen a little bit later on. So your technical leaks, which are tension and technique related and stapler related and things like that, those are the ones that happen in the first 0 to 7 days. Perfusion leaks occur in the 4 to 10 day range. If you listen to the experts with the perfusion companies. So our thought on data is, why aren't we all sharing this together? Because we really don't fully understand every factor that goes into a surgical leak, much less an anastomosis, healing properly. And so our thought is we want to share that data. We're collecting the same data that the perfusion companies are, and that these pre-op blood work companies and the smart drains, we're all chasing post-op leak rates, infection rates, reoperation rates. And of course, the most devastating of all is the permanent colostomy where you lose function of the bowel for the rest of your life. Those are all the same endpoints. Those are the endpoints that surgical societies are most focused on. And so our thought is we're creating a data architecture that can be used by anyone. And our intent is to share that data transparently with the world. And that goes back to a belief. I think when you think about the oath that physicians take, they're all trying to do better. And I believe that if you're part of healthcare in industry, you have to contribute to the greater scientific understanding of the problem you're working on. Not just to prove your product works and you should sell it and it should be used. You'll get that. But when you create impact and create transparency, that data is very valuable. And there's no reason not to share that broadly, especially given how complicated surgical leaks are. We need every angle of perspective and every data source to triangulate that. So part of what we're doing, I think, is we will bring new understanding to surgical leaks that we just don't have today. And if you're relying on the air bubble test, you don't have a quantifiable data point from the OR that you can then look at outcomes and things like that with it.
Excellent. Oh, it's a wonderful just progression of like building these ecosystems, right? We need to provide an ecosystem of data and all the right hardware positioned in the right point of care so that we have that full story for clinicians. There's gaps in that story right now, and I think Qaelon's doing a great job of progressing solutions there. There's two questions I have, so I'll kind of do one to lead to the next, and then you can kind of drift from them. So, hey, it's the Pretentious Engineer from way in the future, and I want to share some actions you could take. I know the conversation's not over yet, and we'll get to the back end of this dialogue as well as Liam's 5 big brain ideas. But I know that sometimes you might get busy, you might have to pick up your kids from preschool, you might pop off a little bit early. And I want to make sure that you can, at a minimum, at least connect with Liam. So I want to share 6 things that could be of value to you. The first of which is you can connect with Liam on LinkedIn, or he will also be presenting at Sages MBT in February 19th through the 21st. So if you'll happen to be out in Houston, highly suggest you grab some time with him. Just send him a DM on LinkedIn. You know he's in the middle of a raise, so that's a great way you could support him as well. Number 2, if you want to connect with me, I'll be delivering a keynote on innovation from the margins, as well as a workshop on hitting zero and nurturing this audacity to not really care what people think about you during your entrepreneurial journey. This will all be occurring in Basel, Switzerland at health.tech, where a lot of strategics from both pharma and MedTech, as well as startups, policymakers, VC, will all be gathered together at the heart of Europe. This will be on March 3rd through 5th. I do have an affiliate commission that I get from anyone who decides to go. So if this makes sense for you in your personal development, you want to step out and connect with other companies, you just want to be part of these amazing dialogues, I'd encourage you to click my affiliate link and purchase a ticket there. And that'll help support my business. And hopefully I can meet with you in person, and that'll be awesome. Number 3, I'd encourage you to check out the Big Brain Waitlist that I shared earlier in this episode. And if there's any services I offer that make sense for you, feel free to leverage them and reach out through the waitlist, or share it with a friend, because it helps me just get the right leads so I can figure out who to be selective with and who to serve so that we can progress global healing together. Number 4, feel free to join the Sunday Sips waitlist or nominate a friend. If you like these dialogues, and if you think you or someone you know would be my best next guest, please fill out that waitlist. I'm really selective. I only do between 12 and 24 podcasts per year as the target, 1 or 2 a month. And I put 100 plus hours into these conversations, from connecting with the speaker, pre-production planning, recording the episode, all the edits, and campaigning the episode for another 3+ months afterwards. So I try to make this incredibly valuable for folks who are trying to tell their story and connect people around the businesses they're building as well, such as Liam. And then number 5, if you're feeling a bit isolated, I am a community builder on a platform called Skool. Love this platform. I have 2 different communities, the first of which is just called Skool MedTech. And we are focused on that innovation trifecta and helping people triangulate clinical unmet needs, technical feasibility, and commercial viability. And hopefully, folks will start companies that advance global healing from these inspirational conversations we have together. We'll also do monthly masterminds as a community on different areas of specialty. So this month we'll be doing ours on neurovascular robotics, which I've done a lot of research on, which is fun. And maybe next month we'll do colorectal leaks. I don't know. And the second community is the Big Brain Club. This is kind of a wider personal development community focused on helping folks build the lives they desire, living where they want, loving what they do, being paid well for it. And I'm scaling the team to actually serve that community, to give them a greater sense of urgency to start building their life now, to give them a deeper sense of resolve to keep moving forward when things are challenging. Your life's not going to build itself. You got to persist and make it happen. And the third piece is accountability, having someone in the trenches with you that's fighting for you every single day. I have a whole bunch of wonderful courses that I'm putting in that space. I also have a 16-week half marathon training program with lifts that I did all in Japan. If you want to see Joe in Japan 3.5 years ago, as I prepared to run the Tokyo Legacy half marathon. It was right after I'd run the Futako Tamagawa marathon. All of that's inside the Big Brain Club, which should be a lot of fun. And then finally, check out Liam's second SIPS episode. So I've put different markers in the edit that I've been working on. And then I go back and revisit every single marker and just expand upon the dialogue. I pull up the sketch pad, I draw things, I pull up pictures and videos, because the reality is I don't want to derail Liam's conversation, but I know some of you want to go even deeper. So if you want to see some surgical sketches of what colorectal surgery actually looks like, you want to see the instrumentation used and some of the challenges, that's an opportunity to geek out and go a little bit farther. I'll post a link to that, as well as other prior Sunday Sips episodes and their second Sips as well. All right, let's get back to the episode, and make sure you hang on till the end to hear those 5 big brain ideas. The second one that we'll land on is just that bottom right corner of commercial viability, and as CEO but also CCO, for you to provide us a picture on like how large of a market is this? What are the pain points that these hospital networks are already experiencing financially based
Mhm.
on risks from surgical site infections and leaks and reops? But before we even get to that, like where does the technology stand today? Where are you from front end, like experimental, all the way into a product that's developed, you're in testing? And what's the roadmap towards commercialization look like for you? What markets are you
Yeah.
targeting? So you can
So
start the first and then
so
bridge to the second.
yeah. So we have a high performing prototype today. The way I would describe this is in the R&D process, the R part is complete.
Oh, beautiful.
We don't need to improve the performance of the device today. It's highly accurate. And going back to your question before about 100% accuracy, is that going to happen in human patients? I really hope so, but let's be realistic. That may not be the level of accuracy. As you know, patients, every anatomical place, every tissue condition is leading to that. But certainly, starting with 100% accuracy means we have the bar. I think more importantly, our internal bar is how can we impact postoperative leak rates, and our clinical trials and our real world evidence registry will show that. But we have a high performing prototype. We're about to commence the development stage where you take it through design verification, validation, build your design history file, get ready for FDA submission and submission to the notified bodies in the CE for CE mark. So we're 18 months away from FDA submission, and we think that's an 8 to 10 month review process. The good news is that we won't need clinical data for our FDA submission. We will likely have that as part of our CE submission, which is why the CE will probably lag by 2 or 3 months behind. But we expect to be on the market in 2.5 years. But we expect to be doing our first in human as soon as we finish design verification. So we'll start capturing human data sometime about a year from now, and that'll be that data will very rapidly prove the things that we want to prove, both from an accuracy standpoint as well as from an impact on post-op outcomes, and of course the economics of it. So, and maybe that's a good transition into the second part of the question with the commercial part. And so, I think in your commercial, there's a commercial triangle too. Whether you listen to Steve Bell or Craig or other people, they all have, I think, great expertise having marketed and developed and launched so many technologies. To me, that's been the funnest part of my career, is launching, new technologies. And so all of the things that are related to the US healthcare system, I'll talk about that first. We have all of these wins that are at our back. First of all, hospital acquired conditions. There's 5 quality measures that Medicare CMS measures for every hospital in the US, and they rank hospitals based on those 5 quality measures. One of them is surgical site infection. And so a surgical leak is considered a deep surgical infection. So it certainly drives the quality measures. The bottom 25% of hospitals in America, so about 750 acute care hospitals, are labeled as the bottom quartile in those quality metrics. And as a result, they are penalized 1% of all their Medicare discharge reimbursement, not just for their colorectal patients or their GI patients, but every patient, if their HAC, their hospital acquired conditions, the SSI or surgical leak, is too high. And so that is a tremendous problem, especially given that hospitals in America are close to the red. Many of them are in the red or barely making it through with 1 and 2% margins. And so to lose 1% of reimbursement on one of your major patient populations is significant. And it gets worse, or it gets better, because CMS is trying to move towards value-based care. I think the European health systems are probably maybe a little bit ahead of us in the way they've managed it. Totally different situation for lots of reasons. But Medicare and CMS implemented the new team model, and that started January 1st, so a couple weeks ago. where they found 5 procedures that they believe are very significant procedures, one of which is major bowel surgery, which includes all the bariatric work, colorectal cancer resections, benign resections, everything with any major bowel surgery. And what they've done, they chose 740 hospitals in America, and they mandated them to have a capitated payment for a procedure. So now that bundled payment has to take care of all the procedural care, the pre-op care, the post-op care, and it covers any complications through 30 days post-discharge, which is essentially when all of the complications happen for GI surgery, the leaks, the infections, the re-op rates. And so what Medicare has done with this is said, look, it's your responsibility to make sure that everything you do around, before, during, and after the surgery is going to drive the outcomes that we're looking for. And so it's shifted the cost of a surgical leak back to the hospital. And so when you take those two factors combined, you have two very major financial pressures on the hospitals to do what they can to improve surgical leaks. Now, the interesting part is the chief commercial officer, and a former salesperson who still wants to carry the bag. Those hospital names are public.
Mm-hmm.
We actually cross-referenced both lists and found that there's 188 hospitals that are on both lists. So they're not only getting a penalty, they're also getting a capitation.
Wow.
They absolutely have the incentive to do the right thing. But this is where surgical leak detection and the workflows, everything is aligned from a commercial perspective. We're integrated into the existing workflow. So we're not asking surgeons to do anything differently. We're just doing it under a standardized methodology, and we're bringing quantifiable data to supplement what their eyes and hands and brain can see and evaluate. So, we see that as supportive, but we're supporting them with new information. Certainly the patient outcomes, you have the trifecta, or, Olympus talks about their triple aim
Yep.
of economics, the surgeon, and the patient. This is exactly that. I think every major MedTech company has the same, focus, which is to lower costs, to improve outcomes for people and patients. And one of those patients could be my son. So this is personal to me. And then third, make the world easier for the surgeons. The surgeons have a hard enough job. They're under tremendous pressure in every element of it, not only the pressure on cost, but life and the physical toll that it takes. And so, to me, this is the triple aim, or the trifecta, where it's good for the patient, it's great for the surgeon, and it's better for hospitals and healthcare.
Well, and what's interesting, like, capital is challenging to position. I know Ethicon historically has struggled with capital positioning within the OR, and it's another thing that can be in that space. Yet you have such a clear clinical unmet need that you're delivering on with the system. You also have the potential of, like, integrating into anyone's tower, depending on what that pathway looks like, whether it's licensing or acquisition downstream. You're creating this data ecosystem, but you also have the folks in charge of purchasing and efficiency within the hospital from that value delivery are experiencing this squeeze. So gone are the days where a surgeon can say, I want this technology, and it just magically poofs into the OR. Like, it's much more complicated. You have to work through review boards to get it in. And I think you have a lot of potential across the value you're delivering, the clinical outcomes, the ability to fit it within the right ecosystem that could be existing in different robotic plays, or it could just be a standalone system if you go that route as well. Like, there's a lot of good things happening in these spaces. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about market conditions for a
Yeah.
little bit. So, years ago you had the video towers and the video tower wars, and you had the robotic platform wars, and they weren't competing with each other. And what we're seeing now with the new entrants with robotic surgery, many of whom have an open architecture platform, you're now seeing an overlap of capabilities. And so, there are towers that would be attached to a robot that are now in ambulatory surgery centers.
Mhm.
And you've got video tower companies who aren't competing just with themselves for footprint in the OR, they're competing with every other robotic platform. And so, that's certainly driving the M&A activity. That's driving a lot of different competitive factors. To me, that's exciting because the new entrants have to find a way to differentiate their robot. And you can listen to Steve Bell's podcast, and I think he details every single robot company. When he signed up for this, there were probably 50, and now there's 100.
Yeah.
So his job's getting harder and harder. But you've got all these different entrants that are fighting for footprint. I don't think the hardware is what's going to differentiate. Yes, there are console and non-console and open and all those different things. But I think what's going to differentiate going forward, and this is where the video towers get pulled in, is the capabilities you have with your tower, whether it's robotic or laparoscopic, the capabilities you have, the what you can enable a surgeon to do are going to be the drivers of adoption. And so everyone always asks the question, like, how do you compete with Intuitive? Well, if you go head to head with them, you are going to lose. They have thousands of procedures, millions of procedures in their background. They leverage data as the standard, and they've done it for so many years. They're exceptional at working with surgeons and integrating into workflows. What they're doing is very, very good. So if you try to compete with them head on, you won't be able to. And so the video tower companies, the robotic entrants, are going to have to find things that they don't have today. So, for example, look at perfusion. So every different laparoscopic tower has a perfusion technology. They all bought those different technologies 5 or 10 years ago. And now you have startups like Active Surgical and Hypervision Surgical, both of which are now quantifying perfusion, which makes it even stronger from a data proposition. That's going to disrupt what's already on their towers. And I know they're probably sitting there going, well, we bought that technology years ago. Now we have to buy another one. Yeah, I mean, if you go back to, is it VHS or beta? No, we're not even doing videotapes anymore, right? We're digital or streaming. And so I think it's that type of thing. That's where Qaelon's excited because, we not only bring a capability that no one else has with leak detection, but we also have it on a constant flow insufflator. And so that component does two things. And the one thing I learned from AirSeal and ConMed, and it was really fun to launch the AirSeal robotic solution. It was the fastest growing product at ConMed in launch to get to 10 million in sales, which was under a year. I learned a lot about the fact that if you have a differentiated technology, it will fit into the ecosystem as long as you can integrate it easily. Yes. And so part of our data strategy, which goes into our product strategy, is making sure that our insufflator leak detection can easily integrate into any tower, any video system, any robotic system. And so that's a design input and an expectation of our user specification that is driving what we're doing. So we think we can help companies that have a video tower today differentiate theirs from the incumbents, as well as robotic platforms, with the goal and end of if the new capability is leak detection, we can help and contribute to better outcomes. It's one piece; it's not the whole piece, and so that's what we're doing.
Well, and the soft tissue surgical robotics market's getting saturated and more challenging as different companies are looking for that differentiation. Hinatoli is, pushing towards this better visualization, Japanese design. You have Tumais pushing telesurgery very well. You have all the endoluminal robotics platforms that are progressing with EndoQuest and shoot, I forgot the other one, the big deal. Swan Medical coming out, Revival Healthcare with Olympus, which is a monster. And then J&J with
Intuitive's working on that too.
Yeah, I know. I'm sure they're cooking something. And then you have Ottawa just rolling out soon. Hopefully they have FDA submission, and they have the Dualto stack that's going on, and that's designed to be modular. So there's room to fit into that world. And then Hugo with the open console. So if you had the ability to give clinicians all the information they need around surgical leaks, as well as that insufflation stack, there's huge value there for any of these partners that are trying to differentiate from what intuitive standard of care is, because that's who we're all trying to beat or work around to find our way to different ORs. So it's exciting to see where Qaelon stands in all those spaces. So, Liam, this has been super helpful and valuable for me, and I'm sure anyone else who's attending this. You mentioned your son's journey with Crohn's disease, which a lot of folks might not even be familiar with what that is. I wasn't until I met you and started looking into it. So, as we kind of round towards the close of this dialogue before I have to pick up my daughter from preschool, because I'm fitting everything in the gaps, could you tell me a little bit about your story as a father and what's kind of fueling you to innovate in these spaces and what he's navigating the risks with Crohn's disease as well?
Yeah, I think I'm going to go back to the start.
Yeah.
I got into healthcare for the reasons I shared, that I wanted to be proud of what I'm doing the way I was proud of being a naval officer. And then life happens, and my wife and my son both have Crohn's disease.
Oh, I didn't know about your wife.
My niece and nephew have IBD, and so this is a disease that results in surgery more often than not. And I've been through surgery in my house. It's difficult, but then now I think about my son, who's a graduate of The Ohio State. He got Crohn's when he was a teenager, and it certainly took a physical toll, took an emotional toll. It's really hard to process, something chronic like that at a young age. And I'm so proud of how strong and tough he is. And he's actually probably one of my inspirations about how you use adversity to become more empathetic. He's a high school volleyball coach now and doing his master's to become a therapist or a social worker. But he has Crohn's disease, and I've read the statistics. If you have Crohn's disease, you have a 70% chance of ending up with surgery over your lifetime. Now, I'm lucky, his health has been well managed by some of the infusion therapy. He's extremely healthy. He makes excellent choices. So I'm hoping he's not in that 70%. And I believe he's not, but it's still something that worries me. And so when I think about the worst outcome of surgery, it is the colostomy rate. When you have colorectal surgery as a whole, 9% of those patients end up with a permanent colostomy, where you're emptying the bowel contents into a plastic container 3 to 5 times a day. So 9% for all of colorectal surgery. When you have those patients with an early surgical leak that happens in the first 7 days after surgery, that rate goes from 9% to 45%. So surgery for Colin scares me, but that's the part of surgery that really scares me. And so if we can change that, we change the quality of life for so many people. And that's what drives me when I get tired. And I'm an ultra trail runner, so I'm used to running through pain and heat and cold and miles and miles and miles. People ask me how far I run. I say I just run crazy far. But that's Colin motivates me to keep going when you're tired and when you're frustrated, and you keep digging to find a solution. Probably not unlike the surgeon that you spoke about in Japan, who was doing everything he can to get a good outcome. And sometimes those take hours and hours. And so I think that's kind of what inspires me to keep going when it gets tough.
It's beautiful. And how can people wrap around you and Qaelon in this next season for you? I know that you're pushing towards design verification, taking your prototype, your high fidelity prototype, towards the commercial market. I'm sure you're raising in this season. Like, what does that look like, and how should folks
Yeah,
connect with you?
we're doing a Series A right now, which hopefully will fund us through FDA approval, and certainly first in human and CE mark submission. So I'm doing whatever CEO does, and capital raising has been harder in the last couple of years than it's ever been. But we're excited about the pathway we're on for that. So we're always looking for investors that can see that we're going to change the standard in healthcare. We're going to have great impact with our technology, and a leadership team that I think is experienced and knows how to bring this to market and drive the change in the standard of care, which is our ultimate goal.
It's incredible. And as an encouragement to anyone watching this, like, in addition, if you're not an investor, but you see this video, like, forward it along. Don't just like repost it or share it, but send a DM, someone in your network who care about what's happening here, because LinkedIn is incredibly personal. And
Yeah, we're sharing the stories, and we're getting engagement from surgeons, from strategics, from investors. It's really exciting that it's people recognize, and I'll go back to what several surgeons have said to me, Liam. It's inevitable that this will become the new standard of care. You have to execute well. You have to bring the clinical data, which we will, and you have to maintain the accuracy or close to the accuracy you've achieved in the preclinical world. And so that encourages us, so we're excited about our path. There's a lot ahead, and most exciting to get into patients here once the technology is ready for that.
excellent. And I normally end this with, like, if you wanted to share one last insight or big brain idea, but I actually want to take a risk and reframe that a little bit differently. I loved your story of the pain and the transition moving from military into those first 6 months of sales rep at the con, and just how far you've come since then. So if you had a big brain idea you'd share with Liam in that pretty hard, challenging 6 months, like, what would that encouragement look like? Because I'm sure that's an encouragement to any of us in this industry as we have different challenges in our own journey. So I'll make space for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it was, very honestly, the fear of failure. I think I was successful as a naval officer, and what I did there, and so that kind of drove me a lot. Fear of failure, I think, drives a lot of people. I think the other part is the more I had clinical conversations with surgeons and realized that I had the knowledge and products and technology that could change what they did. We had a big focus in open heart surgery at that time, and to watch probably 500 open heart surgeries over those 4 years, and to be part of that team. Um, I feel like we're part of the healthcare team. I know there's a lot of debate about having reps and having industry in the OR and whether that's good or bad. I believe that with new technologies, you earn the right to be in the operating room, and to be part of that team is something that personally is very rewarding. Probably because, again, I almost failed organic chemistry and realized I'd never be a doctor, but had to find a way to be part of it anyways. And so I'm super proud when I walk in a hospital and I recognize that I'm going to have the honor of being in the operating room. First thing I do is walk up to the patient's face every procedure. It's a reminder personally that that's the standard. That's why we're here. Everything has to be for their benefit. So I start with that, and to be part of that healthcare team, even in a small way, is to me is very, very honorable, and I'm super proud of that.
Incredible. Liam, thank you so much for the time and for being part of Sunday Sips and sharing your story. And I trust that you're going to see Qaelon in the market, and I'm excited to see the lives that it transforms in the years and really decades to come. It's remarkable. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Joe. I really enjoyed it.
Well, friends, you have made it to the end of a remarkable conversation with Liam. And as promised, I'd like to share his 5 big brain ideas that you can sip on and put into practice within your own leadership context. The first of which I found really, honestly, awe-inspiring and humbling, was just this sense of finding pride and purpose in your craft. The line that I shared where Liam was talking with a recruiter and he asked the recruiter, like, find me a vocation where I'd feel the same sense of pride as when I wore a Navy uniform, and him finding that pride in sales in Ethicon, but then carrying that pride further over decades into leading multiple MedTech companies to advance global healing. It's just remarkable. And it's inspiration to me to bring excellence in my craft, to be fully present in the work that we're doing, but fully present for the relationships that we're weaving together as we do this work together. absolutely remarkable. So find that sense of pride and purpose in your craft. And if you don't feel like you have it, connect with a friend, start chatting about it, bring it out into the air, because there's a way to get there. You just have to discover it. Number 2, pass the playbook around the team. This was like, for me, a mic drop kind of moment with Liam. I had never heard of this concept of writing out a sales playbook, passing it from sales rep to sales rep, having them add their own notes, and kind of carrying the whole team's knowledge and know-how together. I've tried to build digital ecosystems that do this at scale at Johnson & Johnson, leveraging VR and a whole bunch of other cool AI, social media kind of stuff brought together. But I loved the simplicity of a physical mailbook that was, or playbook that was either handed off person to person or mailed. I don't know how large of a district they had, but it's something I want to try. Like, I definitely want to try it both with teams in MedTech in the future, my community team that's leading my school, Big Brain Club. This is something that I think could be really remarkable. And for him to still have the book as a leadership anchor on what kind of culture he's creating was also masterful. So I have to give that more thought, and I hope that you try it in your own context. If you plan on doing it, list in the comments below like what context you're using it for and the impact it's having, or that you hope that it'll have. And you can even check in on the video and re-comment, because I still see this stuff months and years later. I get notifications, which is awesome. That's number 2. Number 3, up your clinical acumen and OR fluency. He had another beautiful line where if a sales rep or an industry partner and a clinician were talking across the room and you saw them both, if you could immediately tell who Johnson & Johnson was or who Stryker was, that was failure. Like, they had to be able to hold the same level of clinical acumen and dialogue. And that's what it really looks to serve your patients and your clinicians, to elevate that skill set. Me coming from an engineering background, medical was always challenging for me initially. Like, it was always a stretch to attend surgery, to understand what's going on. And you have to break through all those insecurities and just continue to immerse and immerse and immerse and ask questions and try and be the dumbest person in the room long enough until you could stand next to another clinician and have a conversation about what challenges they had with that anastomosis, right? Like, the language comes over time through the exposure. Just like if you wanted to learn Japanese, you can study it in books, but you also got to just go to Japan and work it with real folks. And I think it's the same thing in the clinical spaces. So that's number 3. And that goes for any discipline. I'd say sales, engineers, everyone in medtech needs to get better at this. Number 4, proximity to patients. That's why we're here. So he shared this beautiful story, which reminded me of another story I have, that whenever he goes into the OR, he goes to the face of the patient. And if you've never done a surgical observation, typically the patient is under anesthesiology, under anesthesia. I think it's just anesthesia. I'm mixing up my words today. It's a little bit early for me. And it's just this idea of like, this is why we're here, is to serve this patient and to do everything we can. And even when he was in a sales role, you're still providing insights and direction to the clinicians to use the products as safely and effectively as possible. And that proximity of being face to face is so powerful. And as I shared in this discussion, I worked in surgical robotics for 8+ years before moving to Japan, and I had attended one procedure, one face to face opportunity. And the story that I'm reminded of that I'll kind of leave with you all here is I had the opportunity to attend a whole bunch of interventional bronchoscopy procedures. Now, interventional bronchoscopy in Japan is very different than the US. It's when you're putting a bronchoscope down someone's throat, and then you can biopsy the small airways. You're looking for cancer tumors and detecting if it's cancer or something else so that you can treat it more effectively. But what I didn't know about these procedures, which was a shock to me initially, is the patients walk into the room. They're not put under initially. They undergo light anesthesia once they're laid on the table, and then they kind of come to. I remember a Japanese obachan, which just means grandmother, like coughing up blood on the table, waking up really dazed and confused. I'm this giant, tall, white guy in the background. And I just saw the fear on her face when she came to, and her being disoriented and leaving the room. And she's navigating late stage thoracic cancer and multiple comorbidities. And for me, that was another one of those that's why we're here moments. Having that proximity was incredibly vulnerable. It's vulnerable for her, it was vulnerable for me, it's vulnerable for the clinicians that are doing this every day and navigating, doing the best they can with the technology they have, and still hoping for more out of us as industry. So that reminder from Liam was a huge encouragement. And then the fifth piece, or the fifth big brain insight that kind of spans the entire dialogue, I was trying to think of one more insight from Liam that I found really compelling, was across moving from Navy to C suite, he continues to lead with empathy, which was, I don't want to say surprise to me because I've gotten to know him over time, but just to hear the way he wove stories together and found ways to influence through compassion and through presence and proximity. There's a genuine care with how he comes alongside members of his team and the organizations he builds that I don't want to say it's uncommon, but within Johnson& Johnson, I didn't always experience it. And Liam seems like the kind of leader that you would grow under and that you would want to push harder to partner with him in that vision. So I'd invite you to kind of question how you've been engaging your direct reports and things like that, and see if there's ways where you could be even more empathetic and more proximal and on the ground with them, even as you don't necessarily know exactly what they should always be doing, which is really cool to see him share that experience the first time stepping on a boat, where he's like, I want you to do what you did yesterday and just find a way to do it a little bit better. I think that's something we could all take with us in our leadership journey. So I hope this conversation has been a blessing to you. It's been a gift to me. I'm looking forward to the next dialogue I curate on Sunday Sips. And as always, you can sip on that.
Well, thank you. I'm completely humbled, and I'm pleased to be here. And I support people who deserve supporting, and I think you deserve supporting. And you work hard, and that is one of the tenets that I've had for my entire career, which is work with people who want to really put the work in. So I appreciate what you do.
Oh, it's so beautiful. Thank you for the time and all the wisdom and just your joy and passion for these patients that you're advocating for. I'm really excited to see where Vessel moves next in the years to come. I'll be following you on LinkedIn naturally. And just again, I commend you for all the work you've done for the last years to actually see this close to market. And I trust that it's going to be a massive success and help a lot of people. So appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Joe. Thank you so much for your time and for having me on. It was a really amazing experience. So super glad to be here and thank you very much.
Humbled and touche, by the way. Like, I love everything you said about me, but I think it is me who is watching you in awe of everything you have built, that you are creating, the spaces that you're creating, how you're amplifying unique voices that are not in the spaces you have been in professionally. It's been a joy to watch. When I talk about you to my friends and peers, it's like, you know what Joe did today? You know what video? You know what content? You know what he dared to share and talk about? So I talk about you in a very loving, nurturing, almost motherly way because I'm so proud to see what you're creating and building. So it's my
My
joy.
gosh, it's so humbling.
Thank you, Joe. And I just have to just speak about you again for a second before we end this, which is just
Yeah.
I'm just so impressed by your humility. I'm just so impressed by your ability to put your ego aside and listen and learn and really process what someone's saying to you. I think that's like a really rare gift. I'm so impressed by your intentionality, your thoughtfulness, and just your listening. You just have a listening for people that I think is so beautiful. And it's an honor to know you. You push me, you challenge me. I'm afraid of it. You sit with me in that. And I just can't wait to see where this continues to take you.
For sure. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm humbled really that our path crossed in the last couple of months. You bring um, very positive and growth mindset to this industry. With everything that you've been through, let's say probably like 90% of the population would be just knocked down, and you're just like keep coming. So you continue what you do, and obviously you do it well. So thank you for everything you do for our community and for the world.
Liam, thank you so much for the time and for being part of Sunday Sips and sharing your story. And I trust that you're going to see Kayla on the market. And I'm excited to see the lives that it transforms in the years and really decades to come. It's remarkable. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Joe. I really enjoyed it.